so much for being here. We were just saying before you all joined that this feels kind of like a rehearsal for us. Like we've been preparing for years in order to bring this to life and to bring all of you into it. And so it feels incredibly special to see so many names that we know, so many people who have in many ways supported us throughout this process. So I just want to thank you all so much for being with us. And I want to also thank the Hub for partnering with us to put this on. So as Catherine said, as people join, we would love if folks could drop in the chat, you know, where you're calling in from, any organizations that you might be a part of. And I really just want to lift up the fact that there are many different relationships that people hold to this call. So like I said, some of you have probably been hearing about the front-loading process for perhaps years. Others of you might be kind of hearing about Common Horizon commun for the very first time through Instagram, through socials for this call. You might have participated in a content testing session. So we've been consulting organizers, non-organizers throughout this process and asking you, you know, what resonates, what doesn't, helping to sort of shape the DNA that we've built. And others of you have really been like mentors throughout this process, have been sounding boards, have been people who have supported us in so many ways and have really pushed us at moments where we've been like, we don't know about this, we, you know, want to give up. So I just want to lift that up and say again how much we appreciate all of you and being able to share this with you. So today's call is going to be a short one, and we definitely won't have the time to cover everything that we would like to, but we really do see this call as hopefully the first of many, where we get to sort of share back key insights, learnings, points of analysis that like we really built and grappled with over the course of this process. But also to answer questions and really get feedback from all of you and think of the ways to bring you into this organization that we've spent the past, you know, 2.5 years building the foundation for. So we've often said, you know, we've built the skeleton in some ways, but this organization, it's only going to be brought to life by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people all across the country who really inject it with the spirit and energy that we know movement organizations require. So I'm just going to share my slides very quickly. Someone has a cat with really beady eyes as their picture, and I keep thinking it's a real cat, which is very fun. All right, and maybe just give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just gonna start by pointing out a few housekeeping things. So this call is going to be conducted in both French and English with live interpretation from French to English. So this means that if you don't understand French, you're gonna wanna click on the globe at the very bottom of your screen. And this will enable you to listen in English. So when Catherine or myself or any of you who speak in French, please feel free to speak in French. And Albert will be our interpreter for today's call. So je vais essayer. On est un mouvement qui fonctionne les deux en français et en anglais. Alors si tu peux entendre Albert maintenant, donne-moi un coup de pouce, je crois que c'est, mais je ne sais pas. Non, c'est pas ça. Catherine dit non. But give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Okay. Okay. Excellent. So we are a bilingual team. We think that's something that really makes us stand apart. The past 3 years have been me like trying to remember all of my French immersion from when I was like in grade 6, which has been another sort of side stream project of this, you know, whole building. And so we really see this as much as we are right now a bilingual social movement organization that operates in both French and English. We see this as this like incredible, beautiful opportunity to kick the door in the slightest bit for people to then come and really make this a multilingual movement organization. And so the principle behind that is, we want people to bring and to be able to organize in whatever language they speak, not just the colonial languages of these territories, but we see that as a way that we can build the power that we need in this moment in order to tackle the crises that we're up against. So now that we have interpretation all set up, oh, I moved that to the wrong place. Like I said, today's call is going to be a really short one. So in the time that we have, we're really going to try to cover the sort of story of how we got here, what the impetus for front loading, we keep using that language, we're going to explain it, but like what that means and why we engaged in this process. Then we're going to talk about some of the key learnings, the key analysis that has really informed what we're trying to build. We're going to talk about the major interventions that we're trying to make as a movement organization and what we think sets us apart from what currently exists in the sort of climate movement ecosystem. And then we're going to talk about what's next, what's happening in the coming weeks and months as we prepare to launch this organization, and how we hope to be able to plug you in wherever it might be that you are, whether in Quebec, elsewhere in Canada, in the many Indigenous nations across these lands. So to kick things off, my name is Emma. I don't know if I actually said that. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. And I am based on Treaty 6 territory in Amiskwaciwâskahigan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta. Je vais passer à Catherine. Je vais introduire. Albert is in their interpretation booth, so they're not going to speak, but Albert is also a member of the Horizon Commun team. They use il et they pronouns, and they are based in Jojage, I think I'm pronouncing it right, Montréal. Et Catherine, à toi.
Merci Emma, je suis vraiment contente d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Moi, c'est Catherine Turgeon. J'utilise le pronom elle et je suis présentement en territoire Abénaki et Wapanaki dans la Confédération non cédée, soit à Sherbrooke au sud du Québec. Janelle?
I think Janelle is in the...
Sorry, I'm on. Took me a second. I lagged a little bit. Hi, folks. Hadi, Susie, Janella Point, Stellat'en Inkes Laksuyu Asli. My name is Janella Point. I'm from Stellat'en First Nation, which is located right on the geographical center of so-called BC. I'm Caribou Clan, but I've had the pleasure of living and working in the beautiful unceded territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I see lots of folks have already introduced themselves in chat and where they're from. And if you haven't already, I invite you to introduce where you're calling in from. And if you don't know the traditional names of the territories you're on, you can visit nativeland.ca. We're all calling in from as settlers or uninvited guests from stolen lands, coast to coast to coast. And the hundreds of nations that make up these lands have unique languages, unique culture, unique traditional governance systems that have allowed them to be the only people that have been able to survive sustainably on these lands since time immemorial. And all of these territories have unique treaties or obligations and agreements that we must uphold as settlers and guests on these territories. And despite the ongoing colonial violence perpetrated against these Indigenous nations, they're the strongest force against colonial extraction in this country. So it's really important to the Common Horizon team and all climate and environmental work that we are fighting for the self-determination and sovereignty of Indigenous nations. And I also want to lift up that there is a lot going on globally with colonial violence against Indigenous nations. There is about 100,000 Indigenous Armenians that were forced to leave their territory in what is looking like to be another ethnic cleansing on those lands. And of course, we're witnessing in real time the atrocious violent acts against Indigenous Palestinians in Gaza, a part of a long legacy of colonial genocide there. And to me, that makes it really clear more than ever that the future we're all fighting for a future where we have peace and dignity for all life on Earth is really inextricably linked to our solidarity and support for Indigenous populations on these lands and worldwide. So I hope that we're all finding ways to show that solidarity and support. Another really important element to this work, and something that I think links a lot to what I know as an Indigenous person, is really connecting to our body and spirit. And that could be really hard in times like these when we're bombarded by really traumatic events around the world. So I wanted to start today with just a little grounding by sharing a practice that was shared to me by an elder named Yvonne Rigsby Jones from Halt Nation, who's given me permission to share these with people. And it's a practice that could be used as a cleansing ritual, as a way to kind of shake off any of the trauma or things that are not serving us. And she uses it as a substitute when she doesn't have traditional medicines to be able to smudge off. So I invite you all to participate in this, and more than welcome to take it with you and use it in your circles as a grounding exercise. So how it begins is to start just ruffling our energy, and we're going to do this over our whole entire body. So you start head to toe, ruffling, and you do this all the way down your body, going down your chest and your arms. And any place where you're holding any tension or trauma or anxiety, feel free to spend a little bit more time there. I'm going down my arms, spending a little bit more time in my chest and my heart, letting things fall off that no longer serve us. And then when we've gotten all the way down to our toes, we're going to start up again at our heads, and we're just going to smooth down that energy now. And Yvonne said this is when we're supposed to think really kind thoughts to ourselves and to the world. She always says you got to tell yourself you're precious when you're doing this. So tell yourself you're precious, whatever kind thing to hear, and smooth all that energy going down my arms and then my torso. And down my legs. When you're done, maybe we can just take a big inhale and exhale to the side together, breathing in. Nice big sigh. That's a practice called EPIT from Elder Yvonne Rigsby Jones from Halt Nation. And you can take that one with you wherever you go. And I will pass it back to Emma.
Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, this is a practice that always really grounds me. And I think, like many of you, it's something where, yeah, experiencing a lot in our bodies right now and finding it really hard to feel grounded. So thank you for doing that. So we wanted to start by briefly sharing how we got here. We know that many of you are coming in with, very different sort of pieces of knowledge and understanding about what led to this process in the first place. So as many of you know, in 2019, 350 ran a youth-led federal election campaign that was called Our Time in order to put climate change and a Green New Deal at the very top of the political agenda, right? The Sunrise Movement had started to exist in the US. It was really driving forward a more like bold industrial level sort of solutions to the climate crisis. But from the outset, 350 knew that it didn't want to hold responsibility for what was to come out of Our Time. So it really saw it as, seeding something in the youth climate movement, but ideally wanted to be able to support young organizers to dream up what came next out of this campaign. And so in spring 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, myself and another 350 staff member were invited to join a training that was being put on by a training institute and movement incubator based in the United States called Momentum. And that training was meant to happen in Boston, and it was a fluke that, in it happening online, I ended up being a part of that. And so out of that training, we then went on to recruit 11 people from across the country, from different geographies, movement backgrounds, of different ages and experiences. So we were really looking for how are we pulling together a core team of people that really reflects the movement and the movement organization that we think needs to exist out in the world, and bringing the brains of these people together to kind of dream up and think through what is the type of movement organization that I want to be a part of? What am I hungry for? And so while the kind of composition of this team has really changed over time, we have come from every corner of the country. Some of the people who were part of that initial formation are on this call right now. So from Yellowknife, to Edmonton, to Sherbrooke, to Halifax. And while we came from really different movement backgrounds, different organizing traditions, I think what has united us from the very beginning and what we were looking for was people who had a very deep belief in mass movements and everyday people's capacity to build them, and who were frustrated by the current state of the left in this country, who were frustrated by this sort of tendency towards insularity, and really wanting to build a social movement organization that could win and that could concretely improve the lives of everyday working people. And so that has been what has really driven this process from the very beginning, and what has really kept us united throughout. Alors, je vais passer à Catherine pour parler du processus.
Merci, Emma. Donc, ce processus-là de planification stratégique à travers lequel notre groupe a passé au courant des 2 dernières années et demie,
2.5 years is called frontloading. Frontloading is the process of intentionally building the DNA of a movement organization.
De mouvement. Puis par ADN, ce qu'on entend, c'est la structure, la culture, l'histoire ou le narratif, puis la stratégie de notre mouvement. Avant même de le lancer dans le monde, de façon à s'assurer qu'une fois que c'est fait, une fois qu'il existe, ce mouvement-là, il puisse grandir, puis être capable d'amener de plus en plus de gens à prendre action, mais de façon unifiée, peu importe où est-ce que ces personnes-là se trouvent. Tous les mouvements puis toutes les organisations ont de l'ADN dans la vie, qu'on le sache ou non, qu'on ait pris le temps de les définir ou non. Puis cet ADN-là, si elle n'est pas intentionnellement planifiée, si on n'a pas pris le temps de la développer comme il faut, ça peut mener à des conflits, à une perte de momentum, puis à d'autres enjeux qui peuvent venir contrecarrer les efforts qu'on essaie de faire sur le terrain. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'on a pris le temps de faire ce processus-là de frontloading, d'investir autant d'énergie au courant des 2 dernières années pour arriver à vous présenter ça aujourd'hui. Puis, on pense vraiment que ça valait la peine de prendre le temps de développer cet ADN-là pour être en mesure de bâtir un mouvement qui va pouvoir grandir, puis arriver à l'échelle rapidement, puis être vraiment capable d'avoir des belles victoires dans le futur. Au début, quand on m'a approché pour faire partie de ce processus-là, j'étais comme, moi, je suis pas vraiment ancrée dans le mouvement environnemental, je viens du côté politique, j'ai fait beaucoup de campagnes électorales, mais ça m'a vraiment piqué ma curiosité. Puis une des choses qui m'a le plus interpellée, c'est d'avoir l'opportunité d'organiser avec des gens d'à travers le Canada. Je suis vraiment habituée, de par mon historique d'organisation, de travailler au Québec, un peu en silo, dans une culture qui est très spécifique. Puis là, j'avais tout à coup l'opportunité d'essayer de bâtir un mouvement avec plein de belles personnes pour faire en sorte que le Québec, le Canada, mais aussi les nations autochtones sur le territoire puissent travailler ensemble pour réussir à avoir des belles victoires. Puis ça, pour moi, c'est ça qui a fait la différence. Puis c'est ça qui m'a donné envie de m'impliquer puis de vraiment faire ce travail-là pour réussir à pondre un mouvement tel qu'il est ou une organisation telle qu'on la présente aujourd'hui pour être capable d'avoir des vrais changements. Puis à ça, ça s'est aussi ajouté le contexte dans lequel le frontloading s'est passé. parce qu'on l'a très bien vu en sortant, sortant avec des gros guillemets, de la pandémie de COVID-19, on a vu à quel point le mouvement climatique était un peu pris. T'sais, on était pris dans un cycle de manifestations, mais on ne voyait pas de changement au niveau de nos gouvernements. Donc, on savait qu'il fallait prendre le temps de réfléchir stratégiquement à qu'est-ce qu'on devait faire pour faire changer les choses pour la suite. Donc, quand on a commencé en 2020, pour nous, c'était vraiment clair que les événements climatiques extrêmes qu'on voyait, les mobilisations de masse, les grèves pour le climat, les résistances autochtones contre les infrastructures de combustibles fossiles, que tout ça, ça avait vraiment mis de l'avant le problème de la crise climatique. Mais la grande majorité des gens à travers le pays n'étaient pas en mesure de nommer les solutions à ce problème-là. Puis que nos gouvernements étaient encore plus loin de les mettre en œuvre, d'être capables de vraiment faire face à la crise qu'on voyait. Puis on voyait aussi que des politiciens comme Justin Trudeau puis le Parti libéral n'étaient pas non plus en train de mettre leurs bottines là où était leur babine. Bonne chance pour la traduction, Albert. Que Justin Trudeau, il déclarait une journée une urgence climatique, puis l'autre journée, il achetait un pipeline. Puis le plus étonnant là-dedans, c'est que la grande majorité du public réagissait pas, était pas étonné de voir notre gouvernement faire ces deux choses-là une journée après l'autre. Donc, c'était vraiment clair pour nous que le mouvement climatique avait remporté des victoires narratives importantes dans les médias, qui avait réussi à amener l'opinion publique, puis à la faire évoluer, où est-ce que les gens comprennent c'est quoi le problème. Mais pour arriver là, on le sait que c'était pas une mince affaire. Les gens ont travaillé très, très fort, mais on sait qu'on ne peut pas s'arrêter là. Puis il faut vraiment arriver à avoir des vraies solutions, puis développer ces solutions-là, puis surtout faire en sorte que notre gouvernement les mette en place pour être capable de gagner. Voilà, j'ai en parlé un petit peu vite. Emma?
Wait, I'm just going to repeat the final thing and explain maybe this image in English, just in case people didn't get it in the translation of Babien, because it was taking me 4 minutes to try to think of what that means in English. So this is a sort of tool or framework that we've used throughout the process. We really believe that, like Catherine has said, we've aligned the public around the problem. The climate strike movement, so many of the people on this call have been a part of bringing millions of people out into the street, driving home the urgency of the climate crisis, making clear to people, we're in a crisis, we're in an emergency right now. And that in itself is a massive victory. And I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves credit for the fact that that is hard work. We have advanced finally to that point. And at the same time, we know that the clock is ticking, and what's needed now is aligning people on the solutions. We're in this sort of contestation, this battle over false solutions versus real solutions that are actually going to improve our lives. And then we actually need to institutionalize them. And so while we're not necessarily all aligned on the root causes of the problem, our analysis and what we believe is that in this contestation over what those solutions look like, we can really forefront and bring people into a deeper understanding of those root causes of the problem and fight for solutions that actually address those root causes. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. And I will name that I think for many of us, we know that in the years since we embarked on this process, since the beginning of COVID, the situation in many ways has only become more dire. I think that all of us are feeling it. I think all of us are really struggling to know what comes next. We're feeling the sort of lack of momentum. We're feeling the slog. We're no longer sort of organizing in this kind of mass, moment of the whirlwind that we have experienced in 2019. It's really clear that the complete failure of our governments to meet people's material needs has really led so many of us to realize that the system isn't working for us. But right now, we know that the left isn't effectively harnessing the public's outrage and directing it back up to the people that are ultimately responsible. We're not pointing back up to the corporate elite and the political establishment that are doing their bidding for them. And instead, the far right is really stepping in and welcoming people who have real material grievances into their movements. And ultimately, in the absence of this, compelling narrative, the far right has really been validating the public sphere in anger, and they've been directing it towards the very communities that are already the subjects of marginalization and scapegoating. So they're turning the blame on migrants, they're turning the blame on queer and trans people, on Black and Indigenous people. It feels like every other month they're thinking to themselves, okay, what issue, what sort of scapegoating are we using in this moment in order to welcome more and more people into our movements? And the left doesn't have a compelling vision and alternative on offer yet, and we're failing at building the type of power that we need in order to really force our vision into reality and to pull people from the welcoming arms of the far right in many ways. And so that's why we believe that it's especially critical in this moment that we align the public not on any solution, but on the right solutions, on solutions that will ultimately reclaim wealth and power away from this billionaire class and ultimately make all of us. So I'm going to talk through in kind of Cole's notes some of, by no means all of, the major interventions that we really see as being critical to our DNA and to the type of movement organization that we're trying to build. So the first is from the very, very beginning, the sort of principle, some of the underlying kind of theory behind why front loading in the very beginning is because it's about building the foundational sort of strategic culture of a movement organization. I think all of us have either witnessed or been a part of organizations that ultimately haven't had a culture that feels good, that feels welcoming, that feels strategic. And ultimately, we believe that the culture we need to build isn't about, reinforcing these sort of silos and clubhouses that really already exist, but about breaking outside of them and thinking, how are we adopting a culture that forces us to repoliticize the now depoliticized spaces and institutions that we exist within? This is something that over, decades now has been steadily eroded over time. And we see it as being critical to take power, to build power through these institutions, our workplaces, our unions, our community leagues, in order to broaden the movement and build a political force strong enough to force our vision into reality. So Jonathan Smucker is, someone who has really guided some of our thinking behind this. And it's been hard to swallow the fact that, being right wins us nothing if we have no power. And so it's not enough for us to just be satisfied and feel righteous in the fact that, well, I'm on the right side of history. Being on the right side doesn't mean much if you can't pull people over to that right side of history. And so that's a big part of what we think is necessary. So just to say, yeah, the sort of understanding of strategic culture really exists at this intersection of both culture and strategy. We've said since the very beginning, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the most advanced, well thought out plan. And if your culture sucks, if your movement doesn't feel good, you're never going to be able to execute on that plan. And that's a big part of, what we hold true and are hoping all of you can help bring to life. The next thing, which is deeply related to this and to what Catherine has talked about, is that breaking outside of those silos is also the only way that we believe that we're going to be able to build the material power that is necessary to really consolidate wins. And so, like we mentioned earlier, we believe the climate movement has had a ton of narrative wins. But right now, we don't have the type of political and movement power that we need in order to force those solutions to be implemented. And so at the same time, we've also witnessed huge and inspiring changes. Starbucks Workers United, Amazon workers unionizing. We think our entire generation is really waking up and starting to recognize, oh, I have to build power in my workplace. I have to build power in my union and in these sort of institutions that I belong to. And we see that as a critical force that needs to be leveraged for the climate movement in this moment. Sorry, I'm going off script, so I'm looking at my teammates if they are panicked about time. Okay, finally, and I think this is something we could hold an entire like hour and a half long webinar on. But for us, from the very beginning, we have said we need a multinational, decolonial, and anti-racist movement if we're going to win on climate. That's not just something that gets tacked on. It's not something that lives in our culture DNA. It's something that needs to be deeply embedded in our strategy and in all of these elements of our DNA. And so for us, I think that the distinction is that oftentimes, organizations are like, well, this is what's morally necessary, but sometimes it gets abandoned because it's not actually rooted in their theory of change. And so for us, we know that colonization is one of the number one causes of the climate crisis. We know that climate solutions that are rooted in Indigenous self-determination are the way out of the crisis that we're currently in. And at the same time, we also know that the way that we can build this is building a mass movement of people all across the country who, in the same way that Janelle oriented us at the very beginning, actually start to understand and grapple with what are the laws, what are the agreements that actually govern the lands that I'm living on, and what are my obligations to uphold them, and how is it that I'm fighting for climate solutions that are actually rooted in those agreements, and fighting for climate solutions that Indigenous people are not only calling for, but will massively expand their own economic and political self-determination. And finally, okay, don't look. Okay, great. Finally, we believe that building a social movement organization that aims to bridge Quebec and the rest of Canada is essential. And, we know that we're going to be far more powerful together. I think when we think about what is going to scare the shit out of the fossil fuel industry, the corporate elite, the political establishment in this country, it is a mass movement organization that bridges Quebec, Indigenous nations, and people in so-called Canada. We know that Quebec and the rest of Canada have been siloed for far too long. And, we've often avoided doing the incredibly difficult work of bridging across social, linguistic, and cultural differences. Throughout this entire process, we've asked people, do you think it's possible? And jury's out. Some people say it still isn't, but we believe and we hold true to the fact that we actually think it is, and we think it's necessary. And we know that it's not going to be easy. And we know that with all of this, we're going to make mistakes along the way. But we also think that this is the way to build the power that's necessary if we are to stand any chance of toppling the status quo. Okay, Janelle, over to you.
Thanks, Emma. So yeah, again, in very much Cole's notes, gonna touch briefly on the structure of Common Horizon. We are building a membership-based mass movement organizations with chapters across the country. And these chapters are supported by a movement coordination team that I, myself, Emma, and Albert, Catherine are all on right now. And that is a centralized body that coordinates movement-wide campaigns and supports those local chapters to adapt and execute their own campaigns that are in line with our movement's overarching strategy. We intend to reduce pain because we believe that in order to win the world that working people deserve, our movements need to be accountable to everyday people, not wealthy donors and philanthropists. And embracing a dues paying structure forces us to stay focused on our core mission, which is building a people-powered mass movement organization. And we plan to democratize over time. As our movement develops, we anticipate that the decision-making methods will change. Initially, we will be more centralized with the MCT at the center in order to have our DNA passed on to local hubs. And we want to operate on a consultative basis. So people who are involved in and affected by decision-making will be consulted. And subsequently, we hope to democratize our decision-making processes for the movement later on. So yeah, what do those interventions that Emma talk about look in practice? Waiting for the slide. Awesome. Okay, so phase one is what we're in right now. This is where we're taking off and building the movement. Our goal is to launch and to train the base and to really tell our story. So expose billionaires that are torturing our planet for profit. This is where we're going to be villainizing the corporate elite and trying to turn the public against them. Phase two is when we are going to design and build power behind climate solutions that our communities deserve. So this is where we're building and co-creating those climate solutions that our communities need in our communities with our co-workers in our neighborhoods. And this is where we'll start pivoting to not only be working on the national campaign, but sectoral campaigns as well, and really laying the groundwork for phase four. Phase three is about building governing power. So this is where we intend to wield our political power and elect MPs who are going to govern for our people's agenda that our communities have fed into. This is where electoral campaigns are going to be happening and be critical, because we're going to be priming the political conditions for phase four. And phase four is where we plan to disrupt business as usual and force the hand of the government and win what we're calling a people's agenda, our solutions package, a governing agenda that really meets the moment. And this is where if we have primed the conditions well, we will have a watershed moment on climate. The public will be able to understand that the corporate elites are against us. They'll understand what climate solutions look like and have fed into it and adapted it to their own communities. And we'll hopefully have elected politicians who feel accountable to our movement for their victory and are committed to legislating on a people's agenda. Thousands of workers will have been organizing their co-workers to fight these climate solutions, and we will all come together in a period of mass non-cooperation that maybe looks like strikes or something else that's designed to force our government to institutionalize key pillars of a people's agenda. Pass it to Catherine.
Donc, ça, c'est tout ce qu'on a fait pour arriver ici. Puis c'est toutes les choses auxquelles on a réfléchi pour arriver à avoir un mouvement fonctionnel, puis surtout à être prête à lancer ce mouvement-là dans le monde. Puis c'est là qu'on est rendu présentement. On en est à lancer Horizon commun dans le monde. Au printemps de cette année, on a commencé à identifier des gens, puis à les recruter aussi pour que ces personnes-là puissent devenir les coordonnateurs, coordonnatrices de nos pôles locaux à travers le pays. On a cherché à recruter des gens qui, oui, avaient de l'expérience en organisation, que ce soit dans le mouvement climatique ou ailleurs, mais aussi des gens qui n'ont pas d'expérience d'organisation, mais qui sont prêts à s'engager puis qui sont prêts à s'investir pour faire fonctionner ce mouvement-là. Donc, en juillet dernier, on s'est tous réunis à Montréal. Donc, on était à peu près une trentaine. C'est la première fois que Horizon commun existait en public, ce qui était vraiment cool. Puis ça a été le point de départ pour être en mesure de lancer le projet à la grandeur du pays. Donc, ces coordonnateurs, coordonnatrices de pôles locaux-là, ils sont retournés dans leur communauté pour être en mesure de bâtir les pôles locaux là d'où ils viennent. Présentement, on est dans le processus de bâtir des pôles locaux dans plusieurs endroits. Et là, je vais vous les nommer de la côte ouest à la côte est. Donc, on a des gens qui sont en train de travailler à Victoria, à Vancouver, à Yellowknife, à Calgary, Edmonton, Lloydminster du côté Saskatchewan, Kitchener-Waterloo, Montréal et aussi Sherbrooke au Québec. Donc, ça nous fait quand même une belle diversité de gens qui se trouvent dans des lieux et des contextes relativement différents. Puis l'idée, c'est qu'au courant de la prochaine année, c'est de vraiment arriver à bien ancrer les pôles locaux dans leur contexte, puis à diffuser l'ADN à travers ces pôles locaux-là. Donc, s'assurer de développer les compétences de ces leaders-là, puis que tout le monde a ce qu'il leur faut pour être en mesure de vraiment faire fonctionner le mouvement sur le terrain. Puis à travers ça, on a aussi décidé de mener une campagne distribuée qui s'appelle Make them pay ou leur juste part pour vraiment essayer de capitaliser sur le moment politique actuel, aller à la rencontre des gens, puis faire en sorte de je suis juste en anglais, d'aller chercher les profits des grandes entreprises qui sont en train de clairement faire beaucoup, beaucoup d'argent sur notre dos. Donc, ce qu'on demande présentement, c'est au gouvernement d'imposer des taxes sur les profits excédentaires ou excessifs des grandes corporations, des grandes entreprises, puis d'utiliser cet argent-là pour être en mesure de bâtir un monde où qu'on se sent en sécurité, qu'on se sent bien, un monde qu'on mérite finalement. Cette campagne, elle va aussi nous aider à établir puis identifier clairement c'est qui en anglais, les heroes and villains, donc les gentils et les méchants du climat, donc ceux qui sont prêts à prendre action puis qui sont prêts à faire changer les choses, puis les personnes qui en profitent actuellement. Puis montrer à quel point on peut pas continuer de fonctionner de la façon qu'on le fait, puis on peut pas laisser les millionnaires puis les milliardaires continuer à diriger notre économie telle qu'ils le font. Ça va aussi nous permettre, cette campagne-là, de vraiment démentir le fait que des actions contre la crise climatique, ça va coûter cher aux gens, puis de montrer plutôt que c'est quelque chose qui va leur rapporter, puis qui va leur assurer un meilleur avenir. Puis surtout mettre de l'avant à quel point des vraies solutions à la crise climatique, c'est ça qui va changer la qualité de vie des gens au quotidien. Alors voilà. Emma?
Oui, merci, Catherine. Wow, we did good for time. I was expecting there to be 5 minutes left for questions. So very happy that that's not the case. Yes, so now we're gonna open things up for questions. We also understand that, as we go, as we start responding to some questions, others might, arise for people. And so we have made a feedback and interest forum that I'm gonna post in the Slack. And would just highly encourage you to fill this out. If you have other questions after the Q&A portion, if you want to know more, and also if you are interested at all in kind of staying in touch or becoming involved. So right now, as Catherine has sort of said, we're really focused on prioritizing and setting up these existing chapters for success. Our intention in this particular moment isn't to be we're going viral. This call is not really the official launch of the movement per se. We don't have a website. We have people working very hard on it, but we're not ready to really be absorbing hundreds of people. And so just want to make that clear and explicit. That is coming, but our intention with this was really to honor and let in all of the people who have helped us to get to this point. And to update you on where things are at. So just to name that. I am going to go first to the question that's in the chat. And then Sarah, I don't know if you want to sort of manage the questions or if people can just unmute themselves, but maybe I'll go first to the question in the chat, and Catherine and Janelle, feel free to hop in at any point. So the question is there a place for existing local organizations with existing priorities and campaigns in this? That's a great question. It's definitely one that we've gotten before. I think our use sometimes of the word movement can be kind of misleading. We are not building, this massive movement with many different organizations. We are building one particular social movement organization with members that are a part of this movement organization. And we really see our sort of target base, the main target, not exclusively, but the main target of who we're trying to organize is what we would consider to be young workers. It doesn't translate as well in French, but sort of 20 to 35 to sort of 40-year-olds who we believe really exist within these institutions where they can start to envision and build power behind these sectoral solutions that we're talking about. We want to work with many other movement organizations, obviously, in the climate movement, and yet we don't exist to build, a broad-based coalition. That's not necessarily, our objective. We might at later points be involved in coalitions and work together on shared campaigns. And yet right now in this sort of phase one of our strategy, our core kind of ambition and what we're trying to do is launch this organization out into the world and disseminate our DNA. And so in order to do that, that's why we're running, a distributed campaign that we're really holding responsibility for in a more centralized way. Catherine ou Janelle, est-ce que tu as quelque chose à ajouter? Yeah, I hope that's clear. Cool. I'll go to Rhoda. I know, Rhoda, you've had your hand up for a while.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep.
We can.
Yep, we can hear you. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, I'm actually at a relative's computer, but I want to thank all of you, for all the presenters and for everyone who's done a lot of work on this over the years. And I'm really happy to see that it was mentioned, Catherine mentioned it, that the focus was going to be on the initial focus anyway, on an excess profits tax, that money be taken by the federal government and used for the climate justice and need.
You're breaking up a bit, Rhoda.
Okay. I just want to say, there was an action coming up November 4th that said that by any financial means possible to reduce the profits of the corporations. And I hope that in this process that there's a commitment to say no to carbon trading and to emissions, to no to those kinds of market mechanisms that will allow pollution to occur. And the Indigenous communities, Indigenous climate action, for example, is very strongly against. If that can just be a part of the DNA, I think everybody's on the same page with that, but I think it needs to be made clear.
Yeah.
Does the Common Horizons Network, is the Common Horizons Network on the same page?
Yeah. Sorry, Rhoda. I'm just going to jump in because you're cutting out a little bit, but I think I get the gist of, false solutions and like boldly, declaratively calling out false solutions. That's a core part of the DNA. And just to be clear, like that was a key part of why we front loaded in the first place. It was because we recognized that the public sort of collective imagination of what solutions actually are has been so constrained, where they think it's recycling, it's a carbon tax. So absolutely, that's a key part of it. And the way that we think we like really confront that is by organizing around what we call real. We don't actually even, say, oh, they're that bold or they're whatever. They are like concretely the solutions that we need. They're absolutely the only thing that will actually tackle the climate crisis. So yes, definitely a part of the DNA. There are a lot of hands. I don't know if Sarah or others are tracking them. Maybe we can kind of combine them. Catherine or Janelle, do you want to talk a little bit more about There's a few questions. The movement's target timeline relevant to a federal election, Catherine, si tu peux parler de phase 3 qui va probablement être phase 2.
Oui, absolument. Donc oui, quand on a établi un peu le plan du mouvement, on s'est posé la question, ça va être quand les gros moments politiques ou électoraux à travers cet échéancier-là. Puis c'est aussi alentour de ça qu'on a décidé de planifier les différentes phases de notre mouvement parce qu'on considère qu'on ne peut pas réussir à faire des changements si on ne s'implique pas de façon politique. Donc on ne peut pas décider de rester apolitique et de penser que nos changements vont s'opérer d'eux-mêmes. Il va nécessairement falloir qu'on s'engage dans la campagne électorale fédérale. Puis pour nous, l'élection fédérale, c'est celle qu'on souhaite viser, d'abord parce que c'est là où est-ce que l'argent se trouve, c'est au niveau du gouvernement fédéral que les décisions se prennent pour la majorité des choses sur le climat, puis ensuite parce que c'est aussi le gouvernement qui a le plus d'impact sur nos vies de façon générale à travers le pays. Euh, L'échéancier qu'on vous a présenté avec les 4 belles phases, on sait que ça risque de changer un petit peu dans le temps, puis nécessairement, on va devoir s'adapter aussi en fonction de quand est-ce que les élections fédérales sont déclenchées, ou même s'il y avait des élections provinciales vraiment importantes qui arrivaient au courant des prochaines années, on pourrait aussi décider de s'adapter pour vraiment organiser le mouvement alentour de ça. Notre espoir, c'est qu'on ait le temps de bâtir les pôles locaux, de faire rouler la campagne leur juste part, puis ensuite de ça, d'être vraiment en train de tisser nos campagnes sectorielles, puis de s'établir dans différents milieux avant d'arriver à une campagne fédérale. Mais ça, j'imagine qu'il y a que les libéraux qui pourront nous dire quand est-ce que ça va arriver. Donc, on imagine que quelque part en 2024 ou peut-être 2025, si on est chanceux, on sera rendu à ce moment-là.
Merci, Catherine. Alors, on va aller aux mains in 1 second. I'm going to start collapsing questions together. So there was a question about the approach for staying unified when people are in different chapters and places. And so they're obviously, there's a lot to adapt to their own sort of local or regional context. And this, I'm kind of reaching, but there was also a question around in the sort of short or medium term, what are the tactics? So with the Make Them Pay campaign, for example, what kinds of tactics are we using? So the model that we're following is really, again, from more distributed to decentralized. So to answer the question about the approach for, local chapters, facing different situations and contexts and problems and so on, the idea is that while there's more of a centralized plan for the first sort of national campaign, there's an ability for local chapters to still adapt tactics for their own context. So for example, one of the things that we're doing right now that local chapters are doing at the local level is they're holding house meetings. So we see this as like a really critical base building tactic that unions have been relying on for, decades. And, from Lloydminster to Vancouver, people are adapting what that looks like for their particular context. After house meetings, we'll be moving into a phase where we're likely hosting town halls across the country. Lloydminster and Calgary, have a really, really steep uphill battle compared to a community like Vancouver. And so they may say, we're not going to do a town hall because that's a literal security threat for us in Lloydminster. And instead, we're going to hold, bigger and bigger house meetings, but that are potentially private. So just to give you like a bit of a sense of what that looks like in a distributed campaign context. And then as we grow and we get to, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 of the movement, the idea is for those campaigns to become increasingly regional in scope. So sectoral campaigns, for example, are definitely ones that start to exist more at a provincial level, calling for a people's agenda for public education, for example, that meets the scale of the climate crisis. The sort of target for that is more provincially focused. And those campaigns inevitably become much more decentralized, where chapters work together in order to craft what makes sense for their context. feel like I opened a big can of worms by just like sprinkling a little bit of that, but we'll see. Okay. I think Nicolas et après Avery. On va aller.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for making this call. Thank you so much for all your work. My question's about popular education, not public education. I was part of the initial groups of LEAP manifesto that tried to make these movement of movements locally. Didn't really work out. And then the larger ENGOs kind of went back to their usual siloed approach. Going to throw some shade at 350 Canada, apologize already, but in the Our Time campaign, when I asked the definition of the Green New Deal, they didn't really have any. So when I talk about popular education, it's not just learning some sort of academic text about what these things are, but learning in our movements how these things exist. And at the same time, the work that needs to happen is to bridge with existing movements. For example, here in Montreal, the Immigrant Workers Center, Solidarity Across Borders, ISKU, Missing and Murderous Women, all these things are places that we don't need them to come to us. We need to go to them and sort of use the capacity we have. So I wonder in the DNA if those sort of lessons from movement or mistakes made past by settlers and colonizers who built environmental movement and thought they had the answers for everybody else, learn from this and know that there's a bit of humility and local base building in collaboration with existing movements that's going to be done. That was a whopper of a question. I apologize.
Yeah, thank you for asking it. Yeah, I think that's why we are really focused in phase 2 in our sectoral campaigns and really empowering our base and our organizers to be in their communities and to making sure that our solutions package is not something that comes top down or not something we're adopting that has a lot of baggage, but a place where people and communities can really decide what solutions they want to be a part of the people's agenda, and to be building out a strong vision that's community centered. And because it is so ingrained in our DNA to be supporting other movements for change, to be always oriented into Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty, and like Emma said, that not existing in our culture, but in all elements of our strategy, including when we're building those sectoral campaigns. We're hoping that all those things will come through in our people's agenda solutions packages. You're not going to be replicating the past mistakes of NGOs and coalitions that have kind of done things top down. But thank you for raising that up.
I'll maybe just also quickly add, a big portion of this process was we spent months, I think, in what we called a DNA assessment, which was really like going back and looking at the history of the climate movement in Canada, and also thinking through a very critical lens, the sort of campaigns and organizations that we've been a part of, and dissecting what was the strategy, what was the culture, what was the structure, what can we learn from those things. Many of us have been involved in many of these campaigns and come from some of these angles, and we hold a deep love for them, and also like a pretty severe critical eye at the same time. And so that's been part of what I think has made this special, is being like, here are the mistakes that we made. How are we going to learn from them? And how do we then integrate that into the DNA? And where we haven't had those perspectives, we've also sought them out. So we've went and we've talked to people through the 3 years of doing this. And that doesn't mean we're not also going to make mistakes. I just want to be really clear and not have this like clip be repeated as they thought they had everything figured out, because by no means is that possible. Sorry, we're gonna go to Avery, and then again, I just want to like lift up that form in case we don't get to your question.
Hello, thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. Yeah, I'm really grateful for the emphasis on intersectionality. If I'm understanding correctly, this movement is wanting to welcome people from all walks of life from all different backgrounds and aims to uplift voices that are often silenced. And if this understanding is correct, I'm curious about the decision to make this dues paying. I'm wondering about it because even when it is sliding scale, there isn't an immediate barrier that is instilled where lower income folks are constantly put in situations where they can afford things and thus feel obligated to contribute or actively want to, but it affects lower income folks disproportionately and incomparably more.
Janelle or Catherine, do you want to take this one or do you want me to? Okay. Do you want to, Janelle? No?
Sure, I can go. Yeah, it's so tough because, like, as I said, the explicit reason of trying to do something different is we don't want to be beholden to donors and philanthropists and to be operating like another and go in this space and not being able to be nimble and quick because we're waiting on wealthy donors. But yeah, that's absolutely a consideration we've had for the dues paying structure, and we're still working out exactly what that's going to look like. And feedback back like that's really important. I think that perhaps it could be mitigated by just making that like really explicit and trying to make clear that we don't want the burden to be on the most vulnerable folks, and to encouraging people that are outside of our base to be paying more. And I think Emma noted in the chat that it will be sliding scale down to 0. Emma, I don't know if you want to add a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I'll maybe just add, Avery, like it's not as if to you know, you're at the local level that you're like walking through the door to get to a meeting and you're like having your card checked proving that you're a member. So I think in so many ways, you know, for those who want to be involved in this movement organization and can't pay dues, that in no way is an inhibitor to them becoming a member and contributing and being a part of the movement just like everybody else. But as Janelle said, we actually think that the much greater risk to working class people is to consider to continue to build movement organizations that ultimately are accountable to these big philanthropists that then steer our strategy. And so, yes, maybe there's an opportunity cost to it, but ultimately we think that having a structure where we feel accountable to our members, where our members feel deeply accountable to the movement, is ultimately the way that we're going to build a better movement organization that I think can like meet the needs of working class people, as opposed to putting our strategy and our DNA at risk of being steered by, you know, people with deep pockets. And so that's part of it. And like Janelle said, like this is something where we're going to go into a phase of piloting it. And if we realize like, oh, it's a huge barrier, and even though there's a sliding scale to 0, it's not worth it, then it is something that we're like willing to toss out. But we do feel committed to trying it for sure. Okay. I'm just trying to check maybe with Janelle and Catherine if there's anyone who's like had a question for a long time. Otherwise, we quickly want to have a bit of a closing and wrap things up on the time that we had committed to. Catherine or Janelle or Sarah? Okay.
Yeah, there's lots of other good questions, but I think for time, maybe we should close. And yeah, very sorry if we missed it, but definitely would like to yeah, really encourage people to use that forum so that we could be answering more questions.
Yeah, and we're going to quickly pass things over to Sarah to plug a few more upcoming hub events. But before that, we really want to end by just really strongly encouraging all of you to be showing up with Palestine in this moment. I think I speak for others on the team when we ourselves have felt a little bit of dissonance. There was an action in Edmonton, and kind of continuing on as normal feels weird in this moment. And I think in some ways, yeah, we're meant to sort of trust that instinct and that feeling. And so we would, invite everyone to share links in the chat right now about any upcoming actions that you know about in the cities where you live. And then we're also, Janelle's about to post a call to action, but we would really, encourage people to call your MPs to demand that the federal government call for an immediate ceasefire in this moment, that they restore electricity, water, internet to Gaza, allow humanitarian aid in, condemn Israel for the continued occupation of Palestine. We really think in this moment, the world is finally waking up to a 75-year-long occupation and the consequences of that. And as a movement fighting for justice, we really, really, really encourage you to not stop talking about it. Don't stop protesting. Don't stop calling. Don't stop emailing. The lives of millions of people literally depend on it in this moment. And I think, together we have a lot of power. So just want to end with that and pass it over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Emma. And I'd like to co-sign on that call to action. In terms of activist things that we're doing here at the Hub, we'd love for you to check out our Instagram, our Facebook, as well as our website to find out what's coming up. So I'm just going to post that in the chat now, where you can find out more on our website and follow us and sign up for our newsletter, where we will be updating you with what's coming up. Back to you, Emma.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. We'll be in touch. Please fill out that form if you want to get involved, stay in touch. And otherwise, hopefully we will see you soon.
Thanks, friends. Thanks for being here.